Once upon a time, there was an old king who was very sick. He thought to himself, "This must be the end for me." So he said, "Bring faithful John to me." John was his favorite servant and had always been loyal to him his whole life. When John came and stood by the bed, the king said, "My dear John, I feel like I'm going to die soon, and there's only one thing I'm worried about. My son. He's still young and doesn't always know how to handle himself. If you don't promise to look after him, teach him what he needs to know, and guide him like a second father, I won't be able to rest in peace." John replied, "Don't worry, my king. I will stay by his side and serve him faithfully, even if it costs me my life." Hearing this, the king said, "Now I can die in peace." Then he added, "After I'm gone, you must show him the whole castle, every room, hall, and treasure. But there's one room, the last one in the long hallway, that you must not show him. Inside that room is a picture of the princess of the golden dwelling. If he sees it, he'll fall in love so deeply that he'll faint, and his life will be in great danger because of her. You must keep him away from that room." John promised again, and after that the king said no more. He laid his head on his pillow and passed away. When the king's funeral was over, John told the young king what he had promised his father. He said, "I will keep my word and be as faithful to you as I was to him, even if it costs me my life." After the mourning period ended, John said, "Now it's time for you to see your inheritance. I will show you your father's palace." John took the young king all around the palace, showing him every room and treasure. Everything except for one room. That was the room with the dangerous picture. The picture was hanging in such a way that if the door opened, you'd see it right away. And it was painted so beautifully that it looked alive, as if it could breathe. There was nothing in the world more lovely or enchanting than that picture. The young king started to notice that John always avoided this one door. So he asked, "Why don't you ever open this door for me?" John replied, "There's something inside that would frighten you." But the young king wasn't satisfied. He said, "I've seen the whole palace, and now I want to know what's in this room too." Then he walked up to the door and tried to force it open. John stopped him and said, "I made a promise to your father before he died. It could bring terrible misfortune to both you and me." The young king answered, "If I don't see what's in there, I'll never be able to rest. I won't sleep at night or find peace during the day until I've seen it with my own eyes. I'm not leaving until you unlock that door." John realized there was no way to stop the young king anymore. With a heavy heart and many sighs, he took the key from the large bunch and unlocked the door. He went in first, hoping to block the king's view of the portrait. But it didn't work. The king stood on his tiptoes and looked over John's shoulder. And there it was, the portrait of the maiden, shining with gold and sparkling with precious stones. She was so beautiful that the king's heart couldn't handle it. He fainted and fell to the ground. John picked him up, carried him to his bed, and thought sorrowfully, "Oh no, the worst has happened. Lord, what's going to come of this?" He gave the king some wine to help him wake up. Finally, the king opened his eyes, and the first thing he said was, "That portrait, it's so beautiful." "Who is she?" John answered. "That's the princess of the golden dwelling." The king sat up and said, "I love her so much that even if every leaf on every tree turned into a tongue, they couldn't describe how I feel. I would give my life to win her. You are my faithful John. You have to help me." John thought about it for a long time. It wasn't going to be easy. Even seeing the princess was difficult. But finally, he came up with a plan. He said, "The princess loves everything made of gold. Her tables, chairs, dishes, glasses, everything in her palace is gold. You have 5 tons of gold in your treasure room. Let's call the best goldsmiths in the kingdom and have them make the most amazing golden objects, animals, birds, strange creatures, everything she might like. Then we'll take them to her and try our luck." The king agreed and called all the goldsmiths to work day and night. Finally, they made the most beautiful golden treasures anyone had ever seen. John loaded everything onto a ship. He dressed like a merchant, and the king dressed up too, so no one would recognize him. Then they sailed across the sea, all the way to the town where the princess of the golden dwelling lived. When they arrived, John told the king to stay on the ship and wait. "Maybe I'll bring the princess back with me," he said. "So make sure the ship looks perfect. Decorate it and set out all the golden treasures." Then John gathered some of the golden things in his apron and walked to the royal palace. In the palace courtyard, there was a beautiful girl standing by a well. She was holding 2 golden buckets, drawing water. When she turned around to leave with the buckets full of sparkling water, she noticed John and asked, "Who are you?" "I'm a merchant," John replied, and he opened his apron to show her the golden treasures. The girl's eyes lit up. "Wow, these are so beautiful," she said. She put down her buckets and started looking closely at the golden objects, one by one. Then she said excitedly, "The princess has to see these. She loves golden things more than anything. She'll buy everything you have." The girl, who was the princess's maid, took him by the hand and led him up to the palace. When the princess saw the golden treasures, she was amazed. "These are so beautiful. I'll buy everything you brought," she said. But John shook his head. "I'm just a servant of a very rich merchant. What I have here is nothing compared to what my master has on his ship. Those are the most beautiful golden things ever made." The princess's curiosity grew stronger. "Then bring everything here. But John replied, "There's so much of it that it would take days to bring it all. Your palace doesn't have enough space to show everything." Now, the princess couldn't resist anymore. Her curiosity and excitement were too strong. She said, "Then take me to the ship. I want to see your master's treasures myself." John was really happy when the princess agreed to come to the ship. He led her on board, and when the young king saw her, he realized she was even more beautiful than her portrait. His heart felt like it might burst because of how much he loved her. The princess stepped onto the ship, and the king welcomed her inside to show her around. Meanwhile, John stayed back with the ship's pilot and quietly gave the order, "Push off. Set all the sails so we can fly across the sea like a bird in the sky." Inside the ship, the king showed the princess all the beautiful golden treasures, strange creatures, and golden vessels of all kinds. Hours passed as the princess admired everything. She was so amazed that she didn't even notice the ship was moving farther and farther away from land. Finally, when she had seen it all, she thanked the merchant and said she wanted to go home. But when she walked to the side of the ship, she saw they were already far out at sea, with no land in sight. The ship was sailing quickly. Shocked, she cried out, "What is happening? I've been tricked. I'm being carried away. I'd rather die than be in the hands of a merchant." The king took her hand gently and said, "You're not in the hands of a merchant. I'm a king. Just like you're a princess, I'm not trying to trick you. I only did this because I love you so much. The first time I saw your portrait, I fainted because your beauty was so great." Hearing this, the princess calmed down. Her heart softened, and soon she agreed to marry him. As they sailed across the sea, John sat at the front of the ship, playing music. Suddenly, 3 ravens flew toward the ship, cawing loudly. John stopped playing and listened closely. He understood the language of birds and heard them talking to each other. The first raven said, "Look at that! The king is taking the princess of the golden dwelling home." The second replied, "Yeah, but he won't have her for long." The third raven said, "What do you mean? She's right there sitting beside him." The first raven explained, "When they reach land, a beautiful chestnut horse will run up to meet the king. He'll want to ride it, but if he does, the horse will run away, jump into the sky, and carry him off forever. He'll never see his princess again." The second raven asked, "Is there any way to stop that?" "Yes," said the first raven. "If someone else jumps on the horse first, grabs the pistol from the holster, and shoots the horse, the king will be saved. But here's the catch. Anyone who tells the king about this will turn to stone from their toes to their knees." The second raven spoke again. "Even if the horse is killed, the king still won't keep his bride. When they go into the castle, there will be a beautiful wedding robe lying on a dish. looking like it's made of gold and silver. But it's actually made of poison, sulfur, and pitch. If the king puts it on, it will burn him to death. The third raven asked, "Is there a way to stop that?" "Yes," said the second raven. "If someone with gloves picks up the robe and throws it into the fire, the king will be saved. But if anyone tells the king this, half their body will turn to stone, from their knees to their chest." The third raven added, "Even if someone saves him from the horse and the robe, he still won't have his bride. After the wedding, when the dancing starts, the young queen will suddenly turn pale and fall to the ground as if dead. The only way to save her is to lift her up and draw 3 drops of blood from her right breast, then spit them out. If no one does this, she will die. But if anyone talks about it, they'll turn completely to stone, from head to toe." With that, the ravens flew away. John sat there quietly. He was upset and sad because he knew everything that was going to happen. If he said nothing, the king would be in danger. But if he warned the king, he would turn into stone. Finally, John said to himself, "I have to save my king, no matter what happens to me." When the ship reached land, everything happened just like the ravens had said. A beautiful chestnut horse ran up to meet the king. "Wow," said the king, "this horse will take me to my palace." He was about to get on the horse when John suddenly jumped in front of him. He leapt onto the horse, grabbed the pistol from its holster, and shot the horse dead. The king's other servants were shocked. "How could you do that?" they cried. "That horse was so beautiful, and it was going to take the king to his palace." But the king said calmly, "Leave him alone. John knows what he's doing. He is my most loyal servant." Next, they went into the castle. In the hall, there was a dish with the wedding robe lying on it. It looked stunning, like it was woven from gold and silver. The king was about to pick it up, but John pushed him aside, grabbed the robe with gloves on, and threw it into the fire. The king's servants started whispering again. "Now he's even burning the king's wedding robe. What's wrong with him?" But the king said again, "Be quiet. John is the most loyal servant I have. Who knows what good he's doing for me?" The wedding finally took place, and everyone started dancing. The bride joined in the dancing too. John watched her closely, and suddenly she turned pale and fell to the ground as if she were dead. Without wasting a second, John ran to her, picked her up, and carried her to a quiet room. He laid her down, knelt beside her, and quickly sucked 3 drops of blood from her right breast, then spat them out. Right away, the bride started breathing again and woke up. She was fine, but the young king had seen what John did and didn't understand why. Angry, the king shouted, "Lock him in the dungeon!" The next morning, John was sentenced to death. He was led to the gallows where he was going to be executed. As he stood there, ready to die, he spoke up. Everyone who is about to die has the right to say a final word. Can I have that right too? The king replied, Yes, you may speak. John said, I don't deserve this punishment. I've always been loyal to you. Then he told the king everything. He explained how he had overheard the ravens talking on the ship and how he had to do everything he did to save the king's life. When the king heard this, he cried out, Oh, my most faithful John, I was wrong. Forgive me. Bring him down at once. But as soon as John finished his last word, he collapsed and turned into stone. He was dead. The king and queen were heartbroken. The king said, How badly I've treated someone so loyal to me. He ordered the stone figure of John to be brought to his bedroom and placed next to his bed. Every time the king looked at the stone, he wept and said, Oh, if only I could bring you back to life, my most faithful John. Years passed. The queen gave birth to twins, 2 sons. The boys grew quickly, and they brought great joy to their parents. One day, the queen went to church. The 2 children were playing beside their father, who was sitting in the bedroom. Once again, the king looked at the stone statue, sighed, and said, If only I could bring you back to life, my most faithful John. Suddenly, the stone spoke. It said, You can bring me back to life, but it will cost you what is dearest to you. The king was shocked and said, I would give up anything in the world to bring you back. The stone replied, Then you must take your sword, cut off the heads of your 2 children with your own hands, and sprinkle me with their blood. Only then will I come back to life. The king froze in terror. Kill his own sons? How could he do that? But then he thought about how loyal John had been to him and how he had died to save him. After a long moment, the king made up his mind. With a heavy heart, he drew his sword, and with his own hands, he cut off the heads of his 2 children. He took their blood and smeared it on the stone statue. Suddenly, the stone came to life. John stood there, alive and healthy, as if nothing had happened. He looked at the king and said, Your loyalty will not go unrewarded. Then John picked up the children's heads, placed them back on their bodies, and rubbed their wounds with their blood. Right away, the boys were alive again. They jumped up and started playing as if nothing had happened. From that day on, the king, the queen, John, and the 2 boys lived together in happiness for the rest of their lives.